Hello and welcome to another edition of the Pittsburgh Sports Memories podcast. My name is Steve Wirt, and with me today is my co-host.
Hi, I'm Tim Hannon.
All right, and for today's episode, we're going to be reviewing a pretty giant in Pittsburgh sports in general, and especially Pitt football in particular. That'd be Johnny Majors. He was coach of the Pitt team for two different, stints. And so we'll go over both of those. Definitely his first stint was more successful than his last one. Johnny Majors was definitely the coach who brought the Pitt football program back from the brink of extinction. When Coach Majors came to Pitt, Pitt had not had a winning season in many years and had not won a national championship actually since 1937. And he brought them back. By the end of his first tenure as head coach, Pitt would both have a national championship and a Heisman Trophy winner, which was another thing. For all their success prior to 1937, Pitt had never had even a Heisman Trophy winner. So to start we'll start with what state was the Pitt football program in prior to him arriving in 1972? Well, they had a coach called Carl D. Pasquale, and in the prior 4 seasons, the Pitt program had 13 wins and 29 losses, and in his final season he was 1-11. So the athletic department director at the time was Kaz Malinsky, and so they fired him, and they were looking for a new coach. They were actually looking for a new coach that whole season of 72, so I guess they knew they were going to get rid of Coach D. Pasquale at that point. Also, there was very little fan interest. Pitt has always kind of like gone that way. Like, there's probably not it's not like the Steelers or even the Penguins or Pirates. There isn't as big a fan base. And there was no financial support from the donors or the administration. The administration always kind of, which I guess they're supposed to, they kind of emphasize academics. So there's always been kind of a tension at Pitt over the academics and the athletics. The program, like I said, had not won a national championship since 1937. Prior to 1937, Pitt had actually won 8 national championships, and they had not won any since till 1976. Pitt had never had a Heisman Trophy winner, and according to there's a quote from a Pitt historian. He's written several books. His name is Sam Sasulo Jr. About Johnny Majors. He said he saved Pitt football. Pitt football was at death's door in 1972. They were close to pulling the plug on the thing. If they didn't make a go of it, Pitt might be playing Millersville these days. So the administration was literally thinking of like stepping down to like Division I AA, or like basically being like on the level of Duquesne and Robert Morris, which is pretty interesting to think of.
Yeah. Steve, do you think that was, one of the things back then is that Pitt was not in a conference. They were an independent, right?
Yes, yeah. Well, it was a little different. Like, the college football landscape was a lot different than it is now, where you almost have to be in a conference, and there's like kind of like the Power Fives, where there was a lot of independent schools.
Right. But they weren't like today. If you're, I don't know, what's a bad team in a Power 5 conference, like Indiana or Vanderbilt, or like teams that are, maybe they don't have a lot of success, but they're still in a conference. Even teams that are in the Mountain West or something, they're still in a conference, and that kind of carries them. But Pitt football, like, is an independent.
Well, they didn't. Yeah, they relied heavily on the gate, and there wasn't as much TV money because back in 1960s, 70s, there were not four, I guess. Were there even 3 networks back then? I'm not even sure. Was ABC around?
Was around.
Yeah, was around. Yeah.
But yeah, there wasn't a lot of TV.
Yeah, so you maybe get 1-2 college football games a week. So it was back to kind of that old-fashioned, let's put butts in the seats, and your gate and your concessions are how you support football program. That and normally going to a bowl game, but I don't know if the bowl games paid out the way they do now. Once again, the TV just wasn't what it became when cable came in the 80s, and that cable kind of changed everything. Just to go in a little, so Pitt decided to, they focused on Johnny Majors, who had, so a little background on Coach Majors. He was the oldest of 5 brothers. He was from a football family in Tennessee. His father was a high school football coach. Johnny Majors attended the University of Tennessee, where he was an All-American, and he actually finished second in the Heisman voting in 1956. And and a funny story about that was he finished second to Paul Hornung, who's the only player to win from a losing team, because I think Notre Dame did not have a winning record that year. And Hornung, said to Majors, maybe you should have won it. And Majors said, I always thought Jim Brown was better, because that's really the guy who got jobbed that year for the Heisman Trophy. And one of the many reasons that I don't put any stock in winning the Heisman Trophy, it doesn't mean anything. It's a pointless award. You literally didn't give it to Jim Brown because you were a bunch of racists back then. So, I mean, it's just so subjective, and there's, we can bash the Heisman Trophy. Like I said, they don't seem to, like, it's all for quarterbacks mainly. It's tough. Like, you could be a really good offensive lineman, and I'm sure there's been a lot that, how do you compare, like, an offensive lineman to, like, a quarterback or a running back? It's tough to do. So that's kind of the problems I have with the Heisman Trophy, just to go off of them. So, like I said, Kaz Malinsky, the AD of Pitt, he appointed a secret 3-man committee to recruit Majors during the 72 season. It was Sam Sasulo Sr., who was the other guy who wrote the Pitt Historian, I guess his father, and 2 boosters, Bob Miller and Bill Barrell. I'm not sure if Barrell was the guy from the car dealerships, but sounds like a familiar name. So all 72, they go and they recruited. Johnny Majors had actually been a coach at Iowa State, and he had been there for 5 years, and he took Iowa State to their first bowl games in their program history in 71 and 72. So he was kind of an up-and-coming coach. And so their efforts were rewarded, and they get their coach. So he comes in 73, and Sam Sasulo Jr., not his father, the guy the Pitt Historian, said about Johnny Majors also that it was like that scene in The Wizard of Oz where Dorothy goes from the black and white of like Kansas to the color of Munchkin Land or Oz or whatever. And that's what happened at Pitt football. There was such a philosophy change and stuff, and we'll go through some of the philosophy change, what probably inhibited the other coach that was before him, from succeeding. So the first big thing was, back then, I guess, there was no limit on, like, how many scholarships you could get. Like, now there is. You can only give out so many. So, like, bigger programs would give out, like, 50 a year, I guess, back then. And I guess you can't do that now. But, so Pitt had signed an agreement with the Big Four. It was called the Big Four back then. It was West Virginia, Penn State, Syracuse, and Pitt. And they all agreed that they would only give out 25 scholarships a year. I don't know why they put that self-imposed limit on and why they set it so low. But once again, that goes back to, like, the university really didn't take, like, athletics seriously. And I don't think they saw a benefit, like, financially to them, and maybe at that point it hadn't gotten to the financial benefit it is now. But so like I said, most big time programs were the 50, and the university, they got them to remove that self-imposed limit. So Coach Majors in his first recruiting class brought in 70 freshmen. So he even blew the 50 out of the water. So in his first year, and that class included Tony Dorsett and a couple other guys who ended up, I think I'll have some notes on them, but they, all started contributed later as the team developed.
Yeah, that's odd that they had the self-imposed limit. I think, like you said, maybe it was just a way to save money, because it's expensive to give somebody a free ride at your university. but now you more than make up for that with what they do for the football team. But back then maybe they didn't. It's also interesting that there was no limit. It's almost like the pre-salary cap era of some of the major sports, where like, okay, now whoever the have and have-nots are just going to dominate the landscape.
Yeah, it's just a weird one of those things. Like, I guess they very much considered themselves amateur athletics. And there's, there really isn't any more than anything amateur about college football. It's really semi-professional. And, how long before they start paying the players, quite honestly. And what was funny was the NCAA probably caught on, and probably people like our friends at Penn State probably got mad. And in 1974, the NCAA actually brought in a rule called the 95-30 rule, which was a school could only give out 30 scholarships a year and 95 in total. So you couldn't do what Johnny Majors did back then and just go and give like 70 people. Plus, like, Pittsburgh was a different place. The steel mills hadn't gone away yet, so that was still the 70s. So there was a lot more population here. So, and the football talent was deeper and richer and whatnot. So
he got that in just under the wire. Like, imagine if they would have hired him in 74 instead of 73, and then he wouldn't have been able to get all
and I think they gave him a couple years to get down to that. Like, it took him a couple years to actually get down to that rule. Another big thing that happened, and this is still in the offseason, was the previous coaching staff, I guess Coach DePasquale, said that Dorsett was too small to play running back. I don't know if they wanted him to switch positions or just whatever. So the new coaching staff at Pitt was already kind of behind the eight ball because they weren't even looking at Pitt at that point. So Jackie Sherrill, who's like a big time assistant under Coach Majors, he was assigned to recruit Dorsett, and Sherrill said he spent so much time at Aliquippa High School that some people thought he was a substitute teacher there. So I mean, Jackie Sherrill ended up being a really great recruiter and eventually a head football coach.
That's just amazing to me that, like, Tony Dorsett, we'll talk a lot more about him later, but, probably the greatest player in the history of Pitt football, and coaches thought he shouldn't be playing running back. Like, and like, man, you just wonder what happens if the other coach was still there, Like, it's just amazing to me that two people can see the same guy and think completely different things about him.
Well, it kind of goes into like assessing talent, and sometimes you think, this guy maybe should play a different position. It's just not that you don't think he's talented. Maybe you think he's better at a different position. I don't know what other position. Maybe they want to play defensive back or something. I don't know, but he wanted to play running back, and I think Tony Dorsett and Jackie Sherrill, Johnny Major, were probably right about that. More about Jackie Sherrill. During they ran a really tough train. Like, they went in this training camp in the summer, and we'll talk more about that, up in Pitt Johnstown, I guess. And Jackie Sherrill was kind of the designated bad cop, and Coach Majors was more of the good cop. So they kind of did that, like, good cop, bad cop them. Although, I mean, I've read some stories where Johnny Majors could be pretty tough in his own right too. They ran a really tough camp. It's like they compared it to I guess, I don't know if you ever saw it, like, there's a book called The Junction Boys about Bear Bryant's camp at Texas A&M, where he just like ran those people in the grid, just was trying to make people quit. And Coach Majors like really ran a tough camp, and they went up 5-man roll. I had one player said they went up with like 5 buses and maybe came back with like 2 or something. Like, so they every day people would just quit. And Johnny would say, "Those who stay will play." That was kind of his mantra during that camp. The Pitt Athletic Department came up with a cool slogan for the new season. Was this is going to be a major change in Pitt football. So
I see what they did there.
Yeah, clever, yes. 1970s marketing, gotta love it. But so we go into the 1973 season, and Pitt plays at Georgia again. and this is the first game of the season, and they got a 7-7 tie, which was surprising because Georgia, I'm not sure if they were ranked at the time, but Georgia was a pretty good team. A lot of Panther players were playing their first college games, so we had a lot of young players on the team. Coach Major stated it was one of the best efforts he had seen by a team. And the Georgia fans were so mad, this was in Georgia, that they booed the home team off the field at halftime. So this is back so long ago that you could still have ties. So a 7-7 tie, it's not uncommon.
Yeah, but what's still true today is teams getting really angry when Pitt's giving them a game. So that has not changed.
Yeah. The next week, Pitt lost at home to Baylor, 20-14. Baylor was not that good. They only won 2 games, so kind of maybe a letdown after the first week. But it's a young team, and you're probably going to have some of these. Pitt's first win of the season came the next week on the road against Northwestern in Evanston. They beat a mediocre to bad Northwestern team, and Northwestern went 4-7 that year. Another little fun fact about this is 1973, so that was the last time Pitt played, and I guess the last time now Pitt beat Northwestern since the Pinstripe Bowl in 2016. So Pitt would not play Northwestern for a long time after that. Not a common opponent for the Panthers there.
And it was that memorable
Pinstripe Bowl,
of 2016.
Where James Conner got hurt. And,
yeah, and that's about all I remember.
Yeah, Peterman was your quarterback.
Yeah.
Pitt lost to the next week. Pitt lost to Tulane 24-6. Tulane was good that year. They finished 9-7. They beat LSU actually, which I guess Tulane played LSU regularly. I guess that makes sense because Tulane's in New Orleans, so that would be a rivalry game for them. So it wasn't a horrible loss. Tulane was ranked. They finished their season ranked 15th. Next, what happened is the next 4 games, Pitt goes on a solid 4-game winning streak, and that kind of solidifies their season as a successful one. So Pitt beats WVU in Morgantown, 35-7. Tony Dorsett had 3 touchdowns in that performance, and Bobby Bowden was the head coach at WVU that year. So
yeah, I always forget that he was at WVU before Florida State.
Yeah, he was there for like the next 4 or 5 years. So he saw enough of Tony Dorsett and went to FSU. Actually, it's so funny. After one of the bowl games, like WVU, actually they ran him out of town. So
smart move on their part.
Yeah, run a Hall of Fame coach out of town. There you go. It was brilliant. Next up on the schedule was they defeated Boston College 28-14. They had 2 TDs. Dorsett had 2 touchdowns against Boston College. And Boston College that year was a respectable 7-4, 7 wins, 4 losses, but they didn't get a bowl invitation. It was kind of what a concept. 7-4 team that's kind of mediocre doesn't get to go to a bowl. How times have changed.
Yes.
Pitt played Navy the week after that, and they defeated Navy 22-17. Dorsett had 105 yards rushing. Navy was pretty not great. There was no Roger Staubach. Obviously, it was the 70s. Staubach was long gone. I think Navy finished 4-7 that year. So Pitt's kind of like developing a pattern. They're beating like the teams they should and losing the teams that are better.
Which for a young team is a good place to start, honestly. That's a good place to start.
So they're building, and then the next was against Syracuse, next game, and they won 28-14. Dorsett had 211 rushing yards, but no touchdowns. Syracuse was absolutely horrible that year. They finished the year 2-9, which caused their legendary coach Ben Schwartzwalder. I can never pronounce his name. Ben, I'm going to retire after the year, even though I recruited 2 of the greatest running backs of Syracuse ever, which would have been, Ernie Davis and Jim Brown. Ernie Davis died tragically. Jim Brown didn't win the Heisman Trophy because the Heisman committee was a bunch of racists back in 1956. So, but 2 really good players for Jim Brown, and unfortunately Ben Schwartzwalder rode off into the sunset after his 2-9 season. The Panthers, the next week, they were ranked number 20th after their 4-game winning streak, so now they're ranked. And they took on Notre Dame at Pitt Stadium, and Notre Dame was ranked 5th. Dorsett would rush for 209 yards, and that was Notre Dame had a top-ranked defense that year, so it was really good performance by him. And that was at the time, it was the most yards given up to an opposing running back by Notre Dame. What kind of killed Pitt there was this kind of maybe goes back to a young team, and I think they still had some holes on offense. Pitt fumbled twice, and they threw 3 interceptions, the quarterback, and they got stopped on the Notre Dame 7 on 4 downs. And for some reason, like, they didn't give the ball Dorsett on that sequence, so I'm not sure why you don't give the ball to your best player, but I don't know. It didn't fool Notre Dame, apparently. Even with the star running backs, Pitt lost 31-10. Ara Parseghian, who was the coach of Notre Dame, he was impressed by Dorsett's performance. He said, let me see, that he's a super football player, and I'm very impressed. And Dorsett's performance today was a tremendous accomplishment. And that's what Ara Parseghian, who's a very successful coach at Notre Dame. And Notre Dame actually was a very good team that year. They finished the season undefeated. The Irish defeated the number 1 ranked Alabama over Bear Bryant in the Sugar Bowl to earn an AP number 1 and the national championship. So that was the top ranked team in the country. Even though they did lose by like 21 points, they still gave them a pretty good game, and Dorsett had a good game. It's just if they could have eliminated some of the turnovers, maybe they could have at least been closer, if not won. Pitt gets back to its winning ways the week after. They beat an Army team that was 0-10. Dorsett's great. He's 161 rush yards and 2 TDs. You can see like Dorsett's kind of the offense here. When you shut Dorsett down, you kind of shut Pitt down. And at the end of the year, it's the big rivalry game, the game that makes Pitt fans see like red more than West Virginia, and that would be Penn State. Unfortunately, Penn State would have Pitt's number for a couple of these early seasons here. This is one of those occasions. Penn State won 35-13. Once again, Penn State was able to shut down Dorsett. He only had 77 yards and a touchdown. Penn State was pretty good that year. They went undefeated, and they finished 5th in the AP poll. And this is the difference between like Pitt and Penn State here, especially back then, was Joe Paterno always scheduled a cream puff schedule. And that's just how Joe Paterno rolled. Well, you wonder why you didn't win more national championships. Play somebody once in a while. Don't just, play your little cream puffs that you always play. And Penn State was an independent. They weren't in the Big Ten back then too. So they basically controlled all their games. So they played only who they wanted to play. Penn State played. Pitt was the highest ranked team that Penn State had played at that part. Penn State did go to the Orange Bowl. Pitt had played 4 teams that ended up being ranked by the end of the season. So you can see the difference in scheduling there. Penn State played in the Orange Bowl. They defeated LSU, who was ranked 13th. So that was their second ranked team they'd beaten that year. Penn State running back John Cappelletti rushed for 1,522 yards that season and 17 touchdowns. He also won the Heisman Trophy. And another fun fact was Jerry Sandusky was a coach on this team, and he would coach for Penn State until 1999.
During which time he did unspeakably horrible things that were covered up by the university. But that's another story.
Yeah. But a lot of stuff going on there with Penn State. It was a big rivalry. It still is if they would ever play each other. But that's, again, this kind of goes back to the trend where, for the first couple seasons, like Pitt would beat the teams they should and lose. And this kind of reminds me of like Pat Narduzzi's first season where they did the exact same thing. Like anytime they played a team with like a competent quarterback, they lost. And I get the feeling like this Pitt team in 1973, if you were able to shut down Tony Dorsett, then Pitt's offense was kind of not that great. And their defense just hadn't matured enough yet.
Well, it's amazing that he could have 200-plus yards in a game and they could get blown out.
Yeah.
Because if you would think the way to shut them down would be stop, make them pass. Put eight
Yeah.
guys in the box, make them have to pass. But he was still like that's how good he was. He was still getting his yards, but they were still losing. And I'm sure you'll talk about it later. But in Major's second stint in Pittsburgh, he had a very similar player.
Yeah.
Would get a lot of yards, but they'd get blown out.
Yeah, Pitt went to the Fiesta Bowl. They lost to a 10th ranked Arizona State in Sun Devil Stadium. Like, this is insanity. So it's like an Arizona State home game, okay? So they just played Arizona State on the road for fun, and Arizona State was actually good that year. Dorsett did score an early touchdown, but Arizona State pulled away in the fourth quarter. The Arizona State won 28-7. The nice thing was this was Pitt's first bowl appearance in 17 years. So Pitt had been that irrelevant for that long, which is like scary to think about.
And like you said, Steve, everybody needs to know that making a bowl game back then was not like it is today.
Well, even though they're 6-5-1, you saw like Boston College was 7-5. I think Tony Dorsett was probably the big selling point that season.
Right.
So everybody wanted to see who's this young up-and-coming freshman.
Well, and there just weren't as many bowl games. Like now,
Right.
It's like there's a gazillion bowl games. Making a bowl game, you just have to be like 500-ish.
Well, I
Back
think
then,
that,
it
and
wasn't
this
that
is
easy.
the Fiesta Bowl. I don't think that was a New Year's Day bowl back then. I'm not even sure that was played on New Year's Day. So, it hasn't developed into what it quite became here. Great first season for Johnny Majors. It was a big turnaround because just the season before they had one win, and to go from one win to 6 wins and go to a bowl game was huge. And actually, like, there's a lot of signs of like life on this team. Tony Dorsett actually finished with 1,586 yards and 12 touchdowns, which is actually more than the guy that won the Heisman Trophy. So there you go. He didn't have as many touchdowns as that guy. Whatever. So Heisman Trophy again, whatever. It's meaningless. It's like MVP awards. I don't really put much stock in them. If you vote on them, then what's the point? Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of flaws there.
Yeah. So Dorsett's kind of the offense that first year, and I think they surprised people. People hadn't figured out that, like we said, like you got to stop Dorsett. So the second year is 1974, and as we go through this year, you kind of see like I think teams kind of started to figure out like Pitt's offense, and that was like kind of the old like where like 2009 where it was LaShawn McCoy to the left, LaShawn McCoy to the right. This was kind of the same deal. It was like Tony Dorsett to the left, Tony Dorsett to the right. Oh, we're going to mix it up, send them up the middle. So it was more of the same in 74. They had a successful year that first year, and they kind of took a step back. And they did play 3 ranked teams that year. They played USC at Pitt Stadium. And Pitt lost 16-7, which isn't that bad. USC was ranked 18th at the time. Dorsett only had 59 yards rushing and no TDs. USC was very good. They finished 10-1-1 and ranked AP number 2. Pat Hayden was their QB. USC had an early loss to Arkansas and a tie to Cal that kind of cost them the national championship. And they did defeat third-ranked Ohio State in the Rose Bowl. USC ended up being co-national championships with Oklahoma that year, co-national champions. So kind of cost them the outright shot at that. Next, they played such a tough schedule back then. USC and Notre Dame this is insanity. I mean, this is nuts. So they played Notre Dame, who's now ranked number 5. So you played the 18th and the 5th ranked team back to back. Pitt played them in South Bend, and Pitt lost 10-14. It was a close game, closer than the year before. But Dorsett only had 61 yards rushing and no TDs. Notre Dame was the defending national champions, and they finished the year 10-2 and beat Alabama again and finished number 4. Notre Dame that year had a bad loss to Purdue, and they gave up a huge lead at the end of the year to rival USC. So I guess it goes back to the USC. That was a big game for USC, and that cost Notre Dame a shot at the national championship. But like Pitt played like 2 teams ended up being the top 5. It's kind of and they played them closer than the year before. Ara Parseghian did retire after this season, so. And he never coached again after that. except in the they used to have this game called the Super Bowl versus the College All-Stars, and that was in '76, and it's the last time. So that was really like after that season, Ara Parseghian never coached again.
I think he became an announcer after that,
Yeah,
if I remember correctly.
And another fun thing that happened was because Ara Parseghian retired, it totally screwed over Rudy. So.
It's a good thing all those people chanted his name, or else
Yeah.
he would have never gotten into the game.
Yeah. So poor Rudy, he got jobbed there, but Pitt still hasn't beaten. Still kind of like losing to the good teams. Pitt ends up playing Penn State early in the season. They moved the game early, I guess. But once again, Dorsett only has 65 yards rushing and 1 TD as Pitt loses in a blowout to Penn State 31-10 again. Penn State was ranked number 10 and beat Baylor in the Cotton Bowl. And they finished 10-2, so Penn State was also pretty good that year too, and ranked 7th in both poll. Although they lost to unranked Navy and NC State, that was Penn State's 2 losses. Fun fact was NC State was coached by Lou Holtz. Maybe Lou Holtz's lisp distracted the Penn State team. I don't know, but Lou Holtz is a pretty good coach, so you can kind of forgive that. Maybe Penn State played a little. Although, I mean, Navy wasn't that good. I don't know. Penn State's still playing their cream puff schedule. So, Pitt did beat WVU, BC, and Syracuse. BC was respectable that year. Dorsett had like an unbelievable game against them. I guess they couldn't figure out how to stop him or just weren't able to. He had 191 yards rushing and 3 TDs. So, once again, you can see if Dorsett rushes for like a lot of yards, Pitt wins. Dorsett doesn't rush for any yards, Pitt doesn't win. They had a head-scratching loss to North Carolina. Boy, that's been going on forever. Pitt was actually got up to an 18th rank. They lost 29-45. Dorsett only had 59 yards rushing and a TD in that game. Pitt ended up the year going 7-5, and like we said, just because you went 7-5, like nowadays you'd definitely be in like the Car Care Bowl or the whatever bowl. That they did not get to go to a bowl game after that season. And like I said, teams were keying on Dorsett. They were definitely stopped. His offensive stats went down from the year before to 1,004 yards, so from 1,500 to 1,004. And he had 11 touchdowns again, but he definitely had a big drop-off. 500 yards is pretty significant, especially in the rushing. And back then, too, it was harder to get yards. Part of the problem was Bill Daniels was a quarterback. I mean, he seems like a nice guy. He's actually became a financial. Yeah, he became a finance. He had a successful career in finance and then became the head coach, football coach at Olsh. And he only threw 9 touchdowns that year and 8 interceptions, which was actually an improvement over the year before because he threw 17 the year before. But like they just needed more options on offense to keep the defense honest. So back to the recruiting trail, Coach Majors knows that he needs a QB to balance out his offense. So we get into the 1975 season, and this is where like you really start to see, I think, 1975 sets up 1976. This is when, this is his recruits are finally in their 3rd year. He's had 2 more years of getting really good recruits. So now the program is starting to really, come into its own. He starts the year with 2 quarterbacks, Robert Haygood, who is part of the 73 big freshman class, and he was actually kick returner his freshman year, and some guy named Matt Cavanaugh, who was a sophomore from Youngstown. So Cavanaugh came in the year later. Pitt starts off, they beat Georgia again. Like, what the heck? Does Pitt just always beat Georgia, or like?
They always beat Georgia. They always lose to North Carolina.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, weirdly enough. So, and Georgia was 11th ranked, and it was on the road. And that was Georgia would finish the season 9-3 and 19th in the rankings. So Georgia was pretty good. Pitt did play the number 1 ranked and eventual national champ Oklahoma. Spoiler alert here: Pitt football is, if I remember correctly, as of now, and I'm pulling this stat off the top of my head, but I'm pretty sure it's right, 0-16-1 against number 1 ranked football teams when they played them. So the O means they've never won. So, spoiler alert, Pitt lost to Oklahoma when they were ranked number one. Pitt has never defeated a number one ranked team in football. They tied Army in 1945. The last number one team I remember them playing was Miami in like 2002. That was the Yogi Roth game. But
Yeah. If you play Pitt and you're highly ranked, you want to be ranked number one. You do not. Want to be ranked
number two is the jinx. Yeah,
Yeah.
number one, you're smooth sailing.
Yeah, but if you're number two, you're.
Was Clemson
you're
ranked number one when they played them in
No, they were ranked number two.
in the coastal championship game?
Oh, in the championship game, I don't know that. I just when they
Yeah.
beat them, they were ranked number two.
Yeah. If they were ranked number one, then yeah, it's 17-1. But
Yeah.
add another loss to that one. And yeah, as of 220, I mean, I'm sure they'll play Clemson again this year. Maybe Clemson will be ranked number one. So we can make that 18-1. Add another loss to that one. 46-10. It was in Norman. So, I mean, it's number one tank team. It's in their house. Pitt's still kind of a young team. Barry Switzer was the coach at Oklahoma at this time. So, fun times for Barry Switzer. How about them Sooners, I guess he could have said after the game. Pitt goes on a 4-game winning streak against the likes of Duke, William and Mary, Mike Tomlin's alma mater. Hey, they beat Temple, that's something, and Army. All pretty bad teams and games Pitt should win. So once again, they're winning the games they should. They beat a mediocre Syracuse team 38-0. And they lost to a decent WVU team. They played them tough. WVU did 17-14. WVU was actually 9-3. And Tommy Bowden, who actually would be the coach of Clemson and Tulane, if I remember correctly, was on that team. He was a wide receiver because he was Bobby Bowden's son. I guess. Oh, no, they lost to WVU 17-14. I'm sorry. And so Couches did not see the morning in Morgantown. Yeah, so not a great loss. WVU was 9-3. Like I said, they were a decent team. And here you go. This is kind of like turning into your stereotypical like Pitt season. Like, lose that game that you probably shouldn't, win a game that, wow, how did we win that game? So here's your head-scratching win of the year. We've had our head-scratching loss. They beat Notre Dame 34-20. And this was at Pitt Stadium. Notre Dame was ranked number 1 at the time, was coached by Rudy Bad Guy Dan Devine. Probably the biggest win of Major's era of the Major's career, of his career up to that point. Dorsett had a huge game against the Irish, 303 yards rushing and a touchdown. Notre Dame finished kind of a down year for Notre Dame by their standards, probably 17th and a record of 8-3, and they lost to USC, Pitt, and Michigan State. So kind of a down year for Notre Dame, but still a good Notre Dame team.
Yeah, poor Dan Devine gets a bad rap. He had the misfortune of coaching the Green Bay Packers after Vince Lombardi, and then of coaching Notre Dame after Ara Parseghian, and then 20 years later, like for no reason, he's made into like the bad guy of that movie.
He really wasn't too. If you read, like he really did, like that was totally for the movie.
It was. Really, those guys didn't all lay their jerseys on his desk, and he wasn't like opposed to playing Rudy.
Yeah.
They had to add some drama into the movie, and it just, I feel bad for the guy.
I think I'm not sure if this is a season Rudy actually played, but this was.
Oh yeah, 75.
I think it was, but this was.
Yeah.
At Pitt Stadium. So this is at Pitt Stadium, so Rudy wouldn't have been there. Yeah.
Well, and that's why they lost, because they didn't play Rudy.
Well, my favorite Pitt taunt T-shirt of all time was Rudy is offsides, but or was offsides, but that's always a classic to see around the stadium. So Pitt follows up. They had a disappointing loss to 10th-ranked Penn State. They just can't, and it was a 6-7 game. Pitt scored first, but their kicker, Carson Long, missed the extra point. And up to that point, Carson Long was the most accurate Pitt kicker in the history of the program. He missed 2 more field goals in the last 90 seconds of the game. Dorsett actually had a respectable 128 rushing yards, and that was his best performance against I have State Penn, just like channeling my inner dad. He always calls him State Penn. To that point in his college career. Chris Barr, and I don't know how this works. Like I saw this, this was in the New York Times article. Chris Barr was a professional soccer player at the time, and he was the Penn State kicker, and that was how Penn State won. They kicked an extra point, and Pitt didn't. So how do you have a professional player on your team, and that's not a violation? Didn't they take away Jim Thorpe's medals for like taking money one time, way back, and they had to give them back to him? I mean,
that's a great question. All I know is
it just was in the New York Times, like, yeah, he's a professional soccer player. Like, who cares? It's like, wait a minute, isn't that against the rules?
All I know is that losing to Penn State at home because you missed the extra point and 2 field goals in the last 90 seconds is just such a classic Pitt loss.
Well, you have your, like I said, your head-scratching win, your head-scratching loss, and your totally gut-wrenching loss.
Yeah.
So this is kind of your stereotype. Things are going like just right on script for Pitt at this point. Yeah,
Right.
We're having our season like we always do. Penn State, they finished the year 9-3. They ranked 10th. They lost to Bear Bryant and Alabama 13-6 in the Sugar Bowl. The addition of Matt Cavanaugh made a big difference. And Haygood was more of a running quarterback, so they were able to run the kind of that veer option, but then they could put Cavanaugh in, and that gave him more of a passing threat. Dorsett's back. Like, you can tell, like, look at his yards this year. It's 1,554 yards and 12 touchdowns. So his yardage is back up. So obviously, like, having, like, more players on offense and, more balance, or at least another threat with a running quarterback, is helping Dorsett out. And like I said, the recruits on this team are starting to set up like next year. Like, this team had 16 players on the roster that would play in the NFL. So that's pretty impressive.
Yeah, that's pretty impressive.
Pitt plays in the Sun Bowl. They beat Kansas 33-19. Kansas was 7-4. Kansas' big win was they had beaten national champ Oklahoma. Kansas was ranked 19th. Dorsett had 142 yards and 2 touchdowns. Elliott Walker, who was his backup, had 123 yards rushing. And Robert Haygood, who had been kind of hurt the last half of the season, it's his 7th game he started, and he had 101 yards rushing. So like you can see the balance of the 3 runners there. Cavanaugh really didn't play much in that game. They just were able to run the ball, and Kansas was not able to adjust in time. Governor of PA at the time, Milton Schaap, got thrown in the shower after the game. And this was actually Pitt's first bowl win since the 1937 Rose Bowl win over Washington. And it was actually only their 3rd bowl victory overall in the history of the program.
I got to go back to the governor of Pennsylvania getting thrown in the shower. What do you like? You mean like the team shower, like he was in the locker room?
Him and Wesley Potsvar both got thrown in the shower apparently after the game. That was in an article from the New York Times too.
Were they mad or were they like celebrating?
No, they were celebrating. They were
okay.
it was like, hey, wait, let's throw the governor in the shower. Like let's throw Governor Wolf in the shower. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. That's an odd way to celebrate a bowl victory, but whatever.
I've heard of it happening before. Yeah,
it was the 70s. People just partied differently back then.
Well, I don't think they undressed. He was like obviously in his suit, his little governor's suit or whatever he wore.
Did the article say that? Do you know that for sure?
The New York Times did not specify whether he was clothed or not. Sorry, the Times didn't detail that.
We'll have to do some deeper research to answer that one.
Yeah, sorry. But Pitt has finished the season ranked 15th in the AP poll. The big win of the season was obviously beating Notre Dame. Robert Haygood, who was their quarterback for the bowl win, said, "We're going to be national champions next year. That's our goal. We're going to take it all." So kind of prophetic there on Mr. Haygood's part.
Wow. Yeah. Joe Namath-esque.
Yeah. So now we go into the magical season of 1976. Probably, is this the greatest season? I guess they're undefeated. It's the greatest season in the modern era of Pitt football. Is probably better than some of the teams that won national champions.
It's really hard to compare.
Yeah, because like in 1918, they won with like 4 wins because of the influenza, Spanish flu,
right.
Whatever you want to call it.
Right.
So they had a flu epidemic back then too.
And then their championships in the 30s, some of those are even contested.
Yeah.
And it's like, then you wonder, like, how many were there a lot of good college football players at the time of the Great Depression where people were going to college? I mean, you didn't have African American players, in some places because of the racism.
Well, I don't think Bobby Greer until '56. I know he was one of the first at Pitt.
Right, so you were playing against only white players. I mean, so it's really hard to compare eras and say that some team from the 20s or 30s is better than. Certainly, you're right. From World War II onward, the '76 is the greatest Pitt team. There's no doubt.
Yeah. So just to set this season up, Pitt had 18 of its 22 starters returning for the season. They were already ranked 9th to start the season, and they still had that 2-quarterback system of Robert Haygood and Matt Cavanaugh. And Dorsett was back for his senior year. So all the elements are kind of in place. The defense is maturing. They have a lot of, like I said, and this team still has all those players that would play in the NFL eventually. So it is a pretty good Pitt team. The game summaries of this, I got from Joe Starkey from a Trib article on August 27, 2006. It's a pretty good, probably a little better summaries than I could have done, a little more detailed. Pitt starts off on September 11th, 31-10. They blow Notre Dame out by 3 touchdowns. Legend has it that the favored Fighting Irish tried to slow them down. They let the grass grow high. It worked. They held Dorsett to 122 yards, but the problem was he was still managed to run for 181.
So 122 yards, and he had the previous
year, down. So, but he still ran for 181. So he didn't have like 300. Sorry, he only had 181. Well, cut that number almost in half.
It kind of worked.
Yeah. And it was in front of a national televised audience and 59,000 fans. I guess this is this is in Notre Dame. So Notre Dame marched 86 yards for a touchdown on his opening drive, but Dorsett sprinted 61 on his first carry. Dorsett was always kind of like a home run hitter, like almost like a Willie Parker, but a little bigger. And the 9th-ranked Packers, they got back in the game and they kind of cruised 31-10. Pitt plays Georgia Tech on the 18th of September, 42-14. This is kind of like Pitt. This wasn't a smooth season. Like this wasn't, they had to overcome some injuries and some adversity here. And here's a big one: was Haygood, part of their 2-quarterback system. He got a season-ending knee injury, and this is the second game of the year. So junior backup Matt Cavanaugh stepped in, and he connected with Gordon Jones on a 51-yard TD pass to blow the game open. Majors said that Haygood's loss is a tremendous blow to our team, and Major told reporter, and that's an understatement. So they got, they still won. They blew out Georgia Tech, but they definitely have some adversity now. One of their starting quarterbacks is hurt.
Yeah, and Haygood was the running quarterback. Yeah. So that was such a, mix-up kind of thing. Like one guy could run, Cavanaugh was more the traditional quarterback, the drop-back quarterback, and to be able to mix it up like that, you never knew it was coming. Now, with only Cavanaugh in there, you kind of could more easily predict Pitt's game plan.
Mm-hmm. The next week, Pitt beats Temple 21-7. It's 38,000 people come to see Pitt. They expect the 3rd-ranked team, so Pitt's ranked 3rd, to crush Temple. Temple almost beat them, several upsets, but Pitt had to overcome its only halftime deficit of the season. They were down by a point at halftime. It did so. The defense was good. Front line of Al Romano, Don Parrish, Randy Holloway, Cecil Johnson, Ed Wilmakowski helped Pete Pitt in the game until Dorsett broke loose and he had 112 yards. So Pitt kind of survives a scare from Temple. There's been a lot of games like that against Temple. They always seem to give Pitt a good game. Next week, Pitt plays Duke. They win 44-31. Duke's defenders stacked up to stop Dorsett, only to see Cavanaugh torch them with the play-action passes. Cavanaugh completed 14 of 17 for 339 yards and a school record 5 touchdowns. That's pretty impressive, but once again, now, like you see now when teams try and just key on Dorsett, now they have somebody else that can beat you passing.
And that was probably the first time in Dorsett's, he's a senior at this point. That's probably the first time in his time at Pitt where they had a quarterback that was capable of doing that.
Yeah.
Go ahead, you're going to load up in the box. We'll run play action and burn you.
Yeah. October 16th, Pitt plays Miami. They win 36-19. Majors changes his offense a little. He adds the I formation so that Pitt could run like the sprint draw and pitch it to him, which is basically like, I always say, like, envision that like you're basically racing the linebacker to the sideline, and obviously Dorsett is very fast, so it's a nice adjustment. They're going to take advantage of if the linebacker's slow, they're going to make sure they run that with that. Kavanaugh actually got hurt this game, so Tom Ewick actually had to run the offense for a while. Dorsett kind of carried the team, 227 yards on 35 carries, and he moved 152 yards, which is breaking Archie Griffin's NCAA record of the time, which was 5,177. Pitt blows out Navy 45-0. National television audience watched Dorsett become the leading rusher in NCAA history early in the fourth quarter. He only needed 4 yards, but at the Navy 32, he took a handoff and raced to the end zone. I think the Naval cadets actually set off the cannon that they normally do for a naval touchdown for him, so it was a nice thing for the Navy to do. He carried 27 times for 180 yards. Pitt didn't seem to be unnerved by Pitt's dire quarterback sort of situation. It don't make any difference to me who gets me the ball. Who gets the ball to me, and that was Tony Dorsett. He said, whatever, hand me the ball.
Yeah, and that was a big deal. And he's still today, he's still second on the all-time rushing list.
Behind Ricky Williams, yeah.
No, Ron Dane.
Ron Dane. Oh, that's right. Okay.
Yeah. But yeah, he's still second on the all-time list, which is pretty impressive given how many guys have come after him.
Yeah. So 23-13 is the next score against Syracuse. Pitt defeats them. A goal line stand preserved Pitt's closer than expected victory. Bill Hurley for the Orangemen drove Pitt deep into territory, trailing 20-13 late in the fourth quarter. On 3rd and 1 from the 11, Pitt stopped fullback John Sessler, and he also got the call on 4th down. Defensive tackle Don Parrish and Arnie Weatherton stopped him cold. Dorsett rushes for 241 yards. So they have some quarterback problems here. They got Kavanaugh and Haygood are hurt right now, but they're playing teams that maybe just aren't good enough to stop Dorsett. And like you said, Dorsett's in his senior year. And I think they still had other running back, too, to complement him, so definitely good. A nice win there. And Pitt's defense is better. You hold a team to 13 points, that's going to be a good recipe for winning. November 6th, Pitt 37, Army 7. We're number one was the chant at Pitt Stadium. You don't hear that too often. They smoked Army. Kavanaugh returned to the lineup. Purdue upset top-ranked Michigan 16-14, so that kind of opened the door for Pitt to become number one. And then the Pitt after the game was ranked number one for the first time since 1937. So a number one ranked Pitt team. Who'd have thunk it? On November 13th, Pitt played West Virginia. There's a big rivalry game. 24-16 was the final score. Dorsett's number 33 was retired at halftime, marking the first time a Pitt jersey had been retired in the program's 86-year history. He gained 199 yards on a season-high 38 carries. Pitt held off a scrappy bunch of Mountaineers. I remember this. Yeah, I remember reading. Dorsett got ejected from the game. I guess, I don't know. He came up from a pile. Maybe somebody did something to the pile, and he threw a punch at somebody, so they kicked him out. But not after he had 199 yards rushing and Pitt won. West Virginia played him close, but Pitt was able to win. And now the game of the year, Penn State has their big opportunity to ruin Pitt's season and, keep Pitt in their place. Pitt had not beaten Penn State. They were 0 Coach Majors was 0-3 against them at this point, and only one of the games had really even been close. So Pitt wins 24-7, and this is of course classic Pitt again. There were reports floating that Majors would leave for Tennessee after the season. They played this game at Three Rivers Stadium for some reason. They had 50,000 people there, and Pitt beat the Penn State for the first time since 1965. At halftime, Majors moved him to fullback. That totally crossed the Jerry Sandusky coordinated defense. No, I don't think he was. I think he was just linebackers coach, but whatever. It puzzled the coaching staff of Penn State. They couldn't figure it out, and he had 224 yards, and they're saying that clinched the Heisman for Tony Dorsett, obviously, because if you had the most rushing yards all time, and that would kind of, I can't see how you could give it to anybody else. Bob Jury on the Pitt defense, they suffocated Penn State. They picked 2 of their passes off. That guy had 9 for the season, and now they had a date with Georgia in the Sugar Bowl. Dorsett quote about the Penn State game: "One of my biggest assets as a runner was to see things and react in a timely manner. I busted up there a few times, and I don't think Joe Paterno defense knew what hit him. It took us 4 years to beat them, but we finally got Joe."
Nice.
So Tony Dorsett, gotta love him. He's definitely a Pitt guy. I remember even after the 2016 game when we beat Pitt, he was just he was there, and it's nice to see that him get all excited.
Yeah, he's always been a loyal Pitt guy for sure.
Yeah, so that leads us to the bowl game, which was the Sugar Bowl, and this was on January 1st, 1977. Pitt would this game was over by halftime. They used first half interceptions to grab a 21-0 lead. They had 76,000 fans at the Superdome, which the New York Times said would make all their stadiums in existence as obsolete as Rome's Coliseum. Pitt won 27-3. Keith Jackson and Ara Parseghian called the game. There you go. There's Ara calling a game. Jim Lampley was working the sidelines. Boy, wow. Dorsett broke a 32-year-old Sugar Bowl record with 202 yards rushing. Kavanaugh won the game's MVP. He completed 10 of 18 passes for 192 yards. A good Johnny Majors quote: "All year long, I haven't waved my finger in the air, and I haven't worn a number 1 button," Majors said. "But after the game, I told the team it was number 1, and they all agree that we are." A few disagreed, include Bo Schembechler and John Robinson, coaches of Michigan and USC, respectively, because they're a bunch of sore losers. They're saying the winner of the Rose Bowl matchup should be the national champion. Even though those teams had lost the game, what a shocker, I don't even know what their argument was. Pitt had played a tough schedule. Pitt was undefeated. Pitt had won their bowl game against Georgia. So I don't even know what their argument. The rest of the country knew better, and the memorable cover of Sports Illustrated with Kavanaugh leaping in Dorsett's arm saying Pitt is it. And so the conclusion of probably the greatest season in Pitt football history. National champs, undefeated, played a tough schedule, beat Penn State and West Virginia and Syracuse. So, can't argue with that.
Dorsett becomes the all-time rushing leader and wins the Heisman.
Yeah.
The thing about the argument about the Rose Bowl champion should be the national champion, you talked about the Heisman being subjective. Well, unfortunately, in college football, the national championship is also subjective.
Yeah.
And that's dumb. I could go on for an hour about how stupid it is that.
Well, it's so easy, with everybody in conference. Back then, I could see, it was probably tougher to do because there were so many independents.
Right.
Back then, there was 15 or 20 independents.
But now you have a Power 5 conference. You could have a tournament to determine
you could easily, very easily. You could have a Power 5 plus 1, take 1 from the rest, and have, and if the second place SEC team doesn't like that, then move out of your conference if you think you're so great.
Yeah, but they won't. They won't. And again, I don't want to get us too off track, but that's the fact that. It's the only sport where there's an argument about who deserves to be the champion, because in every other sport they play some sort of a playoff and championship game to determine that.
Yeah.
The college football has decided that they'd rather argue about it. So
And it's every other division of college football plays a playoff. That's the whole hypocrisy of it all.
But whatever. At least Pitt got it. And that Sports Illustrated cover that you mentioned, if you go in the Great Hall in Heinz Field, there's a whole display set up.
Yeah.
And they have a gigantic version of that Sports Illustrated cover in that display. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, and like you said, Dorsett won the Heisman Trophy. He finished the season with 2,150 yards, actually his best rushing season of his career at Pitt. Disappointing Majors did leave for Tennessee, and I think that was actually known before the game. Talk about weird, but the team still went out and played hard and won, and I think that just shows Coach Majors respect. And into Coach Majors, credit, he said the only school he would leave Pitt for would be Tennessee, and that was because that's where his alma mater was. Jackie Sherrill returned to be head coach and would coach Pitt until
Until the early 80s. Right?
Yeah, it was 82.
Yeah, and they had some really good teams under Jackie Sherrill. I mean, normally you would see that as, classic Pitt, win the national championship and then your coach leaves because it's Pitt.
Yeah.
But Jackie Sherrill, I mean, I think I don't know if this factored into the decision for Majors. Obviously, again, Tennessee was alma mater, but I think he also knew that Jackie Sherrill, the program was going to be in capable hands with Jackie Sherrill, and it really was. I mean, you think about Pitt basketball years later, whenever Ben Howland left, but the program was in capable hands with Jamie Dixon, and they had plenty of success under that guy. So I think this was similar. Now, they didn't win a national championship under Jackie Sherrill, but
that's a big loss. And was it 81? They lost to Penn State. They ended up getting
they had that
blown
one
out.
loss. Yeah, but they definitely came very, very close. And
they had very good teams.
And they recruited, Hugh Green, Dan Marino, they recruited some of the best players in college football during that time too. So Majors leaving was definitely a huge blow. But like you said, it was his alma mater. It was like a once in a lifetime opportunity, I think, for him.
Well, it was funny too. I saw a quote by Joe Paterno said, people would ask him why he wouldn't retire. It said, "What, and leave college football to the Jackie Sherrills of the world?" It's like, okay, classy Joe.
Yeah, well, yeah.
Well, then they tried to cover. Oh, they became friends afterwards, and they ate dinner at his house, and whatever.
We one of these times we need to do a Pitt Penn State episode and just go off on Joe Paterno because
torch.
I have lots of things to say about Joe Paterno that are not as long.
Well, I'm going to get to that at the end of this too. We still have that kind of coming.
Good.
So Johnny Majors goes to Tennessee. He had already taken the job before the Sugar Bowl game. He said it was the only job he would leave Pitt for. And he ended up coaching at Tennessee for 15 years. He won the SEC 3 times, but he never won a national championship. In 92, he had a heart surgery, and he didn't coach the first 3 games. And this is kind of the bad guy in all this is a guy named Phil Fulmer. And by all accounts, Phil Fulmer is the garbage can of college football. If you want to know why, this is totally unfounded. This is Steve conspiracy theory. I have no proof of this, but I'm totally convinced Michael Orr had to go through that ordeal with the NCAA because Phil Fulmer, who was known to do this, would call the NCAA to, you know what you're doing down at Ole Miss? They're having white families adapt kids. I could just see him on the phone because Michael Orr was from Memphis, and that family was from Memphis, and they didn't go to Tennessee. So Phil Fulmer's a jerk. And that's the bottom line. I said it.
He was the AD at Tennessee?
He was an assistant coach
at
Tennessee. He was not even the head coach.
Okay.
It was him and Cutcliffe was there actually.
Okay.
The guy who actually ended up coaching Peyton Manning, now coaches Duke.
Right.
He's actually, Cutcliffe's actually a respectable guy. Phil Fulmer is not.
Yeah, and they forced him out. And I wonder, because it was only a few years later that Peyton Manning came to Tennessee. Yeah. And you wonder if Majors had still been coaching when Peyton Manning came in, what Tennessee would have done.
Yeah, they did win a national championship with T. Martin.
With T. Martin,
yeah.
They always lost to Florida.
Yeah.
When they had Peyton Manning. Yeah.
And it's just a lot of I read there was a guy Ryan because there's so many good stories about Johnny Majors. You could read a lot of stuff, and there's a lot, even Bear Bryant, and we'll do that. Let's hold that off for the end.
Yeah.
Okay. So Back to the Future, Pitt rehires Johnny Majors in 93 as he gets forced out for no good reason, And it's like a big ugly mess because Phil Former wants to be the head coach, and there was a lot of division in the Tennessee program, so it really wasn't fair what they did to him. So the promo line that was Back to the Future. I remember that. I think I used to have one of those little stadium cushions that set it on there.
I had a cup. I had like one of the souvenir cups that you like that I got a Diet Coke or something, and they put it in a souvenir cup at Pitt Stadium. So I had a Back to the Future Pitt cup. Yeah.
Now the problem was I don't know. Maybe Johnny was a little over the hill. The population in Pittsburgh wasn't what it was in the 70s. The talent wasn't what it was. So I think like a lot of things conspired. The administration just didn't really support him a lot. So he was not able to recapture the success he had in his first stint as head coach. I'm not going to go through like a season recap of these games because they're horrible. I'll do kind of an overview.
You and I were there for a lot of those.
Yeah, so I'll do the ones that I personally remember, just because it'll be funny and it'll be maybe cathartic.
Well, I can tell you,
and all the Penn State fans are going to watch me like be real disappointed, especially West Virginia. This one West Virginia game's really that's probably one of the worst.
Well, when he came in, so where Pitt was in the late '80s, early '90s,
mediocrity. They would finish 6-6, 7-5 every year.
Yes, but they were not horrible.
Yeah.
And so, because a lot of people forget, so they hire him in 1993. In November of 1991, they're the 12th ranked team in the country playing at Notre Dame, and they lose to Notre Dame, and they end up losing a bunch of games in a row to end that 91 season. But a season and a half before they hire him, they're the 12th ranked team in the country. Yeah. A lot of people would never remember that. So they were like on the cusp of maybe starting to be good again. They could, they had like Alex Van Pelt was a really good quarterback in the late '80s. Ironhead Hayward was this great running back. Like they had some good teams, like you said, very mediocre. And so when Majors came in, it was like, oh, we're getting like the legendary Johnny Majors is coming back. And I think there was a lot of excitement. And I had season tickets that first year in '93. My dad got us season tickets, and my dad and my brother and I went to every home game that year, and we did not see them win one time. That year.
That sounds about right.
It was really painful, and then it just got worse, believe it or not, after that, as I'm sure you're about to go into.
Yeah, he wasn't able to recapture the success. So some players from that team, we'll kind of briefly go over them and then maybe rehash what they kind of do before and after. Like Curtis Martin was a surprise success. Curtis Martin only played 1 year at Alderdice, if I remember correctly. And he was like kind of a no-name because Curtis Martin had a rough upbringing, and I don't think Curtis Martin was like kind of one of those people like where what you're good at doesn't match what your passion is. But, Curtis Martin went on to have a Hall of Fame career in the NFL.
And he was,
he kind of was the team back
That was
then.
The only reason I mentioned going all those games in '93. If you look at this, like the scores from that year, it's like there's some games that they lost by literally like 60 points, like not even making that up. And sometimes the only reason to stay beyond halftime was to watch Curtis Martin rip off a 70-yard run, because that's what he was capable of. Yeah. He was so good, but he was literally the only good player they had.
Yeah, he was special. Dietrich Gels, he was a really fast receiver. He actually finished his career at Pitt as the all-time leading receiver in yards and receptions, and he still ranks 6th all-time in Pitt career receptions and 3rd all-time in receiving yards. So, Dietrich Gels, didn't do much. He was kind of okay. John Ryan, I remember he was their quarterback. He was not. He was a JUCO transfer. He wasn't that good. Anthony Dorsett. So he goes and gets Tony Dorsett's son, Anthony. Not a great defensive back. He got burned a lot. My dad used to say, "Yeah, break out the Anthony Dorsett hot mitts," And he did work himself into a decent backup NFL player. And we'll go more into what happened to some of these guys later. Billy Davis was a good receiver. He torched All-American Aaron Beasley in the '94 WVU game, and Beasley was really good. It ended up being like a 10-year pro. And Davis ended up having a 4-year NFL career, mainly a special teams player. Billy West, I remember Billy. I kind of forgot about him, and then this brought me out because I remember how good he was. Like pretty good. He had 1,350 yards rushing his sophomore year in '94. He was Big East co-over the player. He got hurt in '96 and didn't play much his senior year, and I don't think he ever played in the pros. I saw he's doing something in Florida, like a consulting job or something. So in '93, Pitt only won 3 games, like you said. I think I remember going to the Boston College game that year. Pitt lost 33-0. A highlight was, like you said, an 80-yard Curtis Martin run that was called back on a hold. So that play didn't even happen for poor Curtis Martin. And it rained the whole game. We were soaked. We were drenched. It was Pitt Stadium. The seats were like aluminum, so it was freezing cold.
It's miserable.
That's probably one of the, like, just in general, like, nightmare things I remember happening.
Yeah, like I said, I was at every home game that year, and it was one game I remember was against Ohio State. We played Ohio State at Pitt Stadium, and literally half the stadium was red.
Yeah, I go into that. Yeah, I go into that later.
Okay, and they killed us. The one thing I'll say about that team, they lost 8 games. They were 3-8. 7 of those 8 losses were against teams that were ranked.
Yeah, once again, Pitt still played, like, even though they were in the Big East,
but the Big East was made up of these former independents, like Miami and Syracuse, like teams that were really good. Boston College, they were teams that were really good. And
I don't know if Syracuse had McNabb. No, they had Marvin Graves back then, who was really good too. Like, Marvin Graves was a really good college
Syracuse was ranked. Miami, all those teams were ranked, and they played Notre Dame, and they played Louisville, who was ranked,
and they played Penn State. It was
so it was a really tough schedule. Well, and Ohio State.
Yeah.
And Virginia Tech was the only loss that from a team that wasn't ranked, and Virginia Tech was just starting to become a powerhouse.
I think they had Drunken Miller back then. It might have been before Drunken Miller.
Yeah, but that was when they were first starting to become a powerhouse team. Yeah. So in fairness to Pitt, they were miserable. Yeah, there were like huge blowouts at home, but they also had a tough schedule.
I went to '94. I think it was the year I had season tickets, so I had the year after. I remember the Texas game. Curtis Martin had 251 yards, and they lost like by 2 points. I remember Johnny Majors on. This was like back when they used to have the game on like 12:50 on AM, and like he said that the refs earned a Texas T their game, like for like a letter, because the refs were really biased that game. Like that was pretty obvious. Like if Johnny Majors is even saying it, it's probably pretty rough. But Curtis Martin, that was the only game he would play that year, and he was unbelievably good. He played the Ohio game next week, and I remember he like got hit in the ankle, and like he never played. Like I've seen stuff too where people said he was just holding out for the NFL maybe, or I don't know. His ankle was jacked up, and like you said, they didn't win many games anyway.
No, he was not holding out for the NFL because he
ended up being a 3rd round pick, and like. Right. Like he wasn't projected very high.
No, he was not. He was not like a guaranteed 1st round pick. And like you said, he went in the 3rd round. He was Pitt's whole team. That Texas game was exciting because Texas was like the number 18 or 19th team in the country. So that was almost a huge upset. Then you beat the MAC school the next week. But then when Curtis Martin got hurt, it's like, well, that's the end of that season. You knew there was no chance after that.
Yeah, one of now this brings me to the WVU game that year.
Oh, God.
And we could almost do a whole podcast on just this game because this is one of the more insane football games I've ever attended. And it's like remember Bill Simmons used to have like the levels of loss, like, the gut punch. This was like outside of the 2004 or like Sid Slid game. I would even put this above like Sid Slid. It not quite the 2000. Like I didn't feel as just absolutely despondent as I did after this game. Like this game was just a nightmare. So Pitt was down their usual like 31-6 at one point, and that's because they went for 2. And I think it was Sean Fitzgerald was the quarterback. He threw a 2-point conversion that got returned the other way for a 2-point conversion for West Virginia. This game included 2 blocked field goals returned for touchdowns by both teams, and so Pitt finally drives down the lead. Like I said, Billy Davis had an unbelievable game. Billy West was really good in this game. Like they absolutely torched like Aaron Beasley every like for some reason that quarterback pick was pretty decent at just throwing the ball deep. I remember that like their offense just kind of evolved into the Rex Grossman, we're going deep. Like that, and if we're not running it with like Billy West. So they come all the way back, and they had 15 seconds left, and this is just like one of the most painful sports memories because there was a guy named Denoris Mosley on that team, and he was the corner, and I don't know why I liked the guy, just liked him, okay? my whatever 17-year-old self thought this guy was a good player. So I literally saw the future before it happened. Like the West Virginia player, wide receiver runs down. I'm watching him on that play because when you're at the game, you don't just have to watch the ball. And so all of a sudden I see him and he like gets faked out on the sideline and the guy for West Virginia is literally wide open. And I'm thinking, uh-oh, well, maybe the quarterback doesn't see him. Maybe he's going to get sacked. So I look up and the quarterback already has his arm like cocked and is throwing. And as the ball's in the air, I'm thinking, drop it, drop it, drop it, drop. Nope. Catches it, waltzes into the end zone. Pitt loses after an amazing comeback and a 2-point conversion, which they took the lead in the final minute of the game. And that's just literally, and that funny story about you is, tell your side of that game too.
Yeah, so my memory of that game will always be that I had to go to work. I worked at a fast food restaurant, and I was driving, listening to the last few minutes of the game.
And it was on 12:15.
On the crackling AM radio.
Yeah.
And I'm in the parking lot of where I work, and I'm already late, which was bad. But I was like, I got to hear the end of this. I got to hear the end of this. And so I'm listening. I hear them score. I hear them score the 2-point conversion. And I even stuck around for the kickoff because I'm like, oh no, maybe they'll return the kickoff all the way. But they kicked off. They stuffed them at like the 18-yard line.
Yeah, it wasn't. Yeah.
And I'm just like, oh, they did it. They won. There's only 20 seconds left or whatever. I'm like, game's over. And I went inside and I worked the 8-hour shift or whatever. And I came home. It was like 11 o'clock at night because I saw my brother at home and I was like, oh man. What a game. That's so awesome. I mean, it's a bad season, but we beat WVU. How cool. And he's like, what are you talking about? And I said, we beat WVU. I heard the end of the game. He's like, no, you didn't hear the end of the game. And he told me what happened. And I'm like, no, I heard it. They won. It was over. Like, I heard it. And so
you lived in ignorant bliss for 8 hours there.
I did.
It's funny, that's before the internet, because now it would have come up on your phone or something.
Oh, yeah. No, that's all I had was the AM radio.
Yeah.
And I thought that whole night I was happy. It was a nice night at work because I'm like, we beat WVU, and I was so happy. And then, I found out many hours later that, in fact, they had lost.
Yeah, that's one of the worst. Outside the Cincinnati Pitt game in 2009, that's probably the worst Pitt loss I've ever experienced.
I mean, it wasn't. You talked about like Sid Slade and all those games. Like there wasn't a ton on the line. That was a bad Pitt season.
It just would have been like, well, we beat WVU.
Right. But it was a rivalry game. It still meant something. And in terms of if you take away like what they were playing for, nobody's playing for a championship or a trip to the World Series or a trip to the Sugar Bowl or a trip to anything. Like if you take away all that and just the loss itself inside of a vacuum, it might be one of the worst.
Well, they were down 31-6 in the second quarter. They returned a field goal attempt for a touchdown. That never happens.
Yeah.
Never mind 2 of them. I mean, well, West Virginia did the other one, but you never if you see one in a season, you've seen it's just the most unbelievable game.
I think at this point, the shine's starting to wear off of the Back to the Future Johnny Majors return.
Yeah, and I forgot Ruben Brown, who was ended up being a pro. He punched one of the WVU players. So Johnny Majors, I remember him saying that in the interview, we had to sit him down for a series because he got in a fight, which isn't. I mean, it's West Virginia, and it's not that uncommon. So move on to the '95 season. I think by '95. I started to check out on Pitt football a little bit, these last 2 years. But I think I went to this, I think I did go to this 95 game because that was at Pitt Stadium. And that's the game where there was it was in Columbus. There was a ton of Ohio State fans, and they lost. They only won two games. They went 2-9, and they lost 54-14. And I mean, that was bad. Ohio State returned the opening kickoff for a touchdown, and it wasn't a game after that. I just remember all the Ohio State going, and it was horrible.
Yeah, it was tough playing Ohio State back then because.
Well, they were good. They were a good team.
Right. But, and they just, Columbus isn't that far away from Pittsburgh, so they just all came. And
yeah. So 95 season, that's the only thing I really remember. I remember 96. They got blown out even worse, 75-0. That's that infamous game. This probably is the game that ended Johnny Majors' career, quite honestly. They scored, Ohio State scored on a punt return with only 10 players on the field. And I remember Walt Harris said the year before he thought Pitt would at least tried and played. He said that year they didn't even show up. I remember Walt Harris, who would become the coach. Curtis Martin was definitely the best player during his second coaching stint. But the last 2 seasons, they really didn't have much talent. I think the talent slacked off. Like, he just wasn't able to recruit anymore for whatever reason. And Anthony Dorsett, Dietrich Gels was, kind of still another, I think, who was the guy before Majors? I think he was the other guy's recruit, not even Majors recruit. But Dorsett, Matt Lytle, and Tumbledy only made it to the NFL. Those 3 guys were, backups at best. Tumbledy was always hurt. Tumbledy was Big East co-player of the year in 91, but he was always injured. Dorsett, if you remember in Super Bowl 34, because he was the backup to, I forget the starter for Tennessee that year, but he ended up starting in the Super Bowl, and he got burnt by Isaac Bruce on that 80-yard touchdown at the end of the game. You see, number 33. I think it was number 30. I think he wore his dad's number, and he was standing there as Isaac Bruce runs by. It's hey, I remember that a lot. Yeah. It was unfortunate. He wasn't a bad player. He just wasn't as great as his dad. Tumbledy was always hurt. Matt Lytle went on, and for some reason, Matt Lytle had the most successful program. He was a 4-year backup for Carolina, and he was a backup on an NFL Europe team that won a World Bowl, and he was a backup for Carolina for years. They let go of Majors after the year. They kind of did what Tennessee, if they wanted to, should have did what Pitt did. They just made him an associate administrator. So you just kind of gave him a title position, we'll ask you to go out and if we need donors and stuff to get money from people. Beano Cook called Johnny Majors the most beloved Southerner of all time in Pennsylvania. Beano Cook was a writer for Sports Illustrated ESPN, but Beano Cook's well known. Bill Hillgroves on playing for Majors. He talked about he ran the tough camp, the Junction Boys on Bear Bryant's tenured. Only a couple returned to those buses. It was physically demanding. You had to be in super duper physical condition to play for him. I'll never forget he took a sign with him. It was behind his desk when he was the coach at Tennessee, and it said, "If you can't run, you can't play." Matt Cavanaugh said about him, he could be a tough character, but he was a master motivator. But when the curtain was down, he could pull you aside and make you feel pretty good. Dave Wannstedt said he understood the big picture, and everything he did made Pitt a better football program, and that's what great football coach is all about. My dad, on an anecdotal note, my dad used to say during his first tenure, he used to actually do film sessions at the student union after games in the 70s. And my dad learned a lot from football from Coach Majors. He would just go up there and watch these film sessions that he would answer all the students' questions and I couldn't imagine a coach doing that nowadays. Even an assistant coach. You couldn't even do it because people would get up there and just be total jerks. I could see people being jerks to people, what'd you call, Anywho, Coach Major was a great guy. He was a very caring coach. He was like a teacher. He prepared his teams like you prepare someone for life. That was by stressing the fundamentals and what many would think are the little things. And that was Billy West, who was a running back later in Coach Major's tenure. Paul Rhodes, who was a coach, defensive coordinator at Pitt, and ended up being head coach at Iowa State. So he kind of had ties to Coach Majors from 2 different places. Coach Major had left him with a bunch of 3-ring binders. And he said it was neat. He shared all of them with him. And he shared them with Paul Rhodes with his father. And they were able to go through and read them and, gain some knowledge. So, and Curtis Martin, finish that up. Curtis Martin wrote a letter to Johnny Majors after his career was over. I was a knucklehead in college. What you said really helped me get my act together because I knew what you were saying about me was true. Sometimes the things you want in life might not come packaged the way you would want them to, but they come packaged in the way you need them to. And even Curtis Martin said later on, that motivated him. Like, I'm not going to let Coach Majors be right. I'm going to be successful in the NFL, because Johnny said to him, you can't even last a season in the college. How are you going to last, a year in the NFL? But so, yeah, between him and, Bill Parcells, really probably Curtis Martin has a lot to thank for those two coaches. Another one was Tony Dorsett, who was more than just an integral part of my college football career. He was a dear friend who continued his relationship with me far beyond my playing days. He took a young high school kid and showed him how to be a leader and a man. So a lot of great quotes, and you don't hear that a lot about great coaches sometimes. So it's easy to, like, what was his legacy? He passed away this year. He was a great relationship builder, although he knew his X's and O's too. And it's hard to find like anything negative about him, really, like in the media or anything. No scandals, really. I mean, they always said, "Oh, he recruited those 70 players," but that wasn't against the rules back then. And like, "Oh, he might have paid for something for Tony Dorsett." Well, compared to when it went on with, let's compare him to the other, his contemporaries. And I put his contemporaries as Bear Bryant, Joe Paterno, and Ara Parseghian. Bear Bryant did win 6 national championships and had 232 wins, which I think was the most when he retired, or was one of the highest. There's also kind of that segregation thing. Like, now he was in Alabama, and once again, that's another one. He wanted to integrate the team. Well, Bear Bryant didn't integrate the team until the 70s. They did not have an African-American player on an Alabama team until the 70s. They were like one of the last teams. So whether he wanted to or not, he didn't.
He didn't, right?
Yeah, Joe Paterno had 2 national championships and now has his 409 wins back, because, everybody from Penn State cried and whined about it. So the abuse scandal, which, I just remember Mark Madden saying, "Oh, you call him Johnny Walker Red," and, criticize his drinking and stuff. And then, "Oh, well, he doesn't," and then talk about Joe Paterno. "Oh, you Pitt fans are just jealous because Joe Paterno doesn't have any scandals and his reputation is, well, and this was like back when Paterno was still coaching. Where were you, Mr. Investigative Reporter, when all this was still going on? 99, I'm sure Madden was, on the air doing something before then. Sandusky was still the coach, and that went on right under your nose. So,
well, a lot of people, I mean, Paterno was just worshipped by a lot of the local media and a lot of the media in the state, everybody. And everybody just, turned a blind eye to any kind of scandal.
Yeah, and it's like, and then I think that just reflects, besides Philip Fulmer, everybody seems to like Johnny Majors. And Johnny Majors, his stat, he had 1 national championship, 185 wins, and no scandals. He had a lot of success with a lot less support at Pitt than resources and a lot of other coaches at other programs did. And, there were stories about, like, people would think he's not paying attention up in the stands, and he'd be talking to somebody, or they'd think he was asleep, and he'd come out of the stands, and he'd be like, "Oh, you got to," and he'd, like, actually not just yell at them, but critique them, like, on how they ran the route wrong or what the right, like, Billy West said that, and there was another story from Tennessee about that. So I guess Coach Majors liked to kind of fool you that way. But as far as I can tell, like I said, I wasn't able to find anything negative, even out of all the Tennessee stuff. Phil Fulmer didn't even, if he had anything negative to say, he didn't publish it in the press. So go figure.
Yeah, he was by all accounts, a really good guy and a really great coach. I think it's important that we remember, like you said, the fact that the Pitt program was almost dead when they hired him. I think you and I are of the generation where we don't remember that. What we remember is going to all the games in the mid '90s where they lost by 50 points to Ohio State and Notre Dame and Miami, and we weren't there for the '70s when Pitt wasn't even. And in the '70s, remember too, that was a time when the Steelers and Pirates were winning championships, and so for Pitt football to make itself relevant during that era, they had to be really something special. And he made them really something special. And I think there's a lot of Pitt fans to this day. Pitt still has a program to this day you know, like you said it earlier, Steve, maybe they're playing Division I AA or something.
Yeah,
Had
and
they
that was
not done
always and I'm sure the academic side of, because there's always I always feel like there's this tension within the school between the academic side and the athletic side for whatever reason, and and it just depends on which way the chancellor and wants to side. So, but I think now there's so much money involved that I think they see the you got a branding and just the amount of money a football program brings in, especially a successful one. So, but be that as may, Johnny Majors, definitely his legacy is successful coach, better person, and just all around good person, and he influenced the lives of a lot of people, and a lot of people are better for having known him. I mean, so well, that wraps up our podcast, and we're on the internet at Weebly. What is it? Weebly Pittsburgh Sports Memories and that's Weebly.com. Hey, I almost have it right. One more podcast, I'll have it right. But thank you for joining us, and I hope you enjoyed that one.
Thanks, everybody.